that
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Indrani Malkani, Chairman and Managing Trustee, v2.0 Action Network. Greetings, viewers. Let us welcome 2021 with a social Sanchar, which is not a normal social Sanchar, nor an abnormal one, but a most necessary one. With Dr. Vihang Bahia, psychiatrist, Mumbai, International Distinguished Fellow of the American Psychiatrist Society and consultant psychiatrist of Bridge Candy and Lilavati hospitals. From the heart to the brain to the eyes, we now delve into the mind. Mind, the main switch. We really need to know how our circuit board works. We readily talk about any of the physical ailments that we may have, but refuse to recognize or even acknowledge when it comes to issues related to our mind. Why? This issue affects all of us at some time or the other, and for some, it takes over their lives and that of their families as well. And yet, we refuse to acknowledge it. So as a society, we have been a bit complicit, or I should say complicated relationship with mental health. But why should we shroud anything to do with mental health? Ultimately, if you don't get it addressed, it just becomes a huge problem. So it's time that we destigmatize any issue related to mental health. Therefore, we took up this issue to bring to you, viewers, as to how we can address the challenges that come where issues of mental health are concerned. Before we go into the full session, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves. v2.0 Action Network, in short v2.0, is a non-political and not-for-profit registered trust, and all donations to the trust are exempt under Section 80G of the Income Tax Act. Our overarching objective is to establish effective linkages between the citizens and the government. And we work in partnership with various statutory authorities. Our focus areas include aspects of health, a great deal, air pollution, road safety, fire safety, waste management, electoral processes, among others. Many of you have been following our work and have been visiting our web portal, TogetherVCAN.in, and our portal deals with multiple issues on a single platform. And also you have been viewers to our interactive talk show, the TogetherVCAN's Social Sanchars. Your encouragement and participation has been our prime motivation to carry on with our work and keep moving ahead. With the ongoing COVID pandemic, even though these are a little bit more stable days, but it's a long way to go, we started our new version, which is a fully digital one of the Social Sanchar, and expanded into a new series on health and well-being, where we invite as our guest speakers prominent leading doctors and healthcare professionals. We hope that you find value in this new series and support it. Our normal social Sanchars will also continue when the time comes. At this point, I would especially like to thank our Student Council and the NSS students and all the students of our college partner, Jai Hind College, and the other colleges that are associated with us. Our warm thanks are also due to Citizens Association for Child Rights, CSCR, as our implementing partner. I thank Team Technoregion for powering this version of our social Sanchar. I think our students need a special mention again. So I would like my team to put up the slide which acknowledges the presence of Jai Hind College students, the NSS students of Jai Hind College, and the Student Council. Can you put up the slide, please? The acknowledgement slide? No, this is of all the other students, all the other colleges. But I'd like our Jai Hind College first to be acknowledged on screen. I think later we will show it. Thank you. So you see there are various clubs of Jai Hind College which has come forward to ensure that the social Sanchars get the full viewership and they get the benefit from the guidance of our leading doctors and healthcare workers. Our social media young person who works with us, Mr. Sumit Lula, deserves a great thanks from ourselves. And I thank all friends in the media and all of you for joining us today. Dr. Vahia will help us understand the current situation, wherein how do we deal with the pandemic and all the other challenges that have come with it. There are many unanswered questions where our mind is concerned and why we are so hesitant to talk and recognize these facts. Some of the issues that were highlighted with the questions we have received, which relates to suicide prevention, what are the signs to look for, anxiety issues, not only during the pandemic, but especially amongst adolescents and children during the pandemic. Adults have faced this, and so have the children and the adolescent, young adults. How do we respond to stress? The insecurities in contemporary lifestyle modification and the peer pressure. We are all wired with coping mechanisms, but we don't like to talk much, but we would look to Dr. Vahia to guide us in this circuit board situation that all of us need to know about. Also, Dr. Vahia, if you would take up the issue, as we were discussing, between the difference between the brain and the mind. I now invite my colleague and fellow trustee, Mr. V. Ranganathan, our former municipal commissioner and who had led state also as the chief secretary, to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Vihang Vahia. Mr. Ranganathan.
It's indeed a matter of great delight to welcome Dr. Vihang N. Vahia to this social Sanchar on Mind the Main Switch. Dr. Vihang Vahia is a consultant psychiatrist in British Candy and Leelavati hospitals. He is also International Distinguished Fellow, American Psychiatric Association, and apart from being associated with various professional bodies, national and international, he has also numerous publications to his credit in medical journals. It is indeed I would say, a matter of good fortune that we have him to discuss a subject which has now acquired critical importance in the context of the COVID pandemic. Now, the COVID pandemic has resulted in psychiatric problems of various dimensions. Firstly, the person who is affected by COVID-19 remaining in isolation without any contact with people definitely affects them mentally. Second is the relations of these persons who are always in a state of anxiety as to what is going to happen. And nowadays, apart from the medical treatment, the anxiety is also caused by the heavy medical bills and whether insurance will clear it, etc. So they are always in a state of constant anxiety. Then the third dimension is persons who have not got COVID-19, but who are always worried whether they are going to get, whether I will get it, what should I do? If it happens, what happens? So they are always in a state of constant tension, anxiety, and neurosis. And lastly, persons who have lost their near and dear ones, it's very difficult for them to accept the loss of a person in a manner in which they never expected him to pass away. So that creates an enormous pressure. So we really feel that it is a matter of critical importance that Dr. Vahaya can guide us, guide the general public as to how to handle these situations and what is the way in which he can help people to cope up with these challenges, particularly in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic. With these words, I welcome Dr. Vahya and request him to make a presentation and maybe about 15-20 minutes. That can be followed by a question answer session. Thank you.
Dr. Vahya, please.
Good evening. Good evening, Mrs. Milkani. Good evening, Mr. Ranganathan. And good evening to all those who have opted to spend the next few minutes on a Tuesday, warm Tuesday evening, listening to Mind the Main Switch. Why the topic of Mind the Main Switch? Is that we are, world over, every single human being has plunged into a crisis situation like never before. The closest we had to what we are going through now in terms of pandemic was the Spanish flu about 120 years ago. The only thing that we have learned from the Spanish flu is the importance of wearing a mask when there is an infection that can strike a person. Other than that, few of us have any lesson that we have learned and practiced from that pandemic to our current pandemic. So what happened? We have gone through a very set, well-defined pattern of crisis that dealt with our thought process, with our emotions, and our attitude towards ourselves, our near and dear ones, and the authority had a lot to do with how it impacted us. We all began in approximately the month of March 2020 with the fear of being infected by a virus which was potentially fatal and about which no one knew much. So from the gray areas of what's going to happen, that kind of was being discussed between December 2019 and March 2020, suddenly plunged us into a complete darkness of no one being able to tell us what is going to happen. So we had all kinds of restrictions put on us. There was a complete lockdown, the lifestyles changed, the pattern of life changed. And soon we got into a fatigue of COVID. We were tired of what was going to happen to us. We had some free time that we were never used to. Not the free time that we enjoyed, but free time because round the clock we were locked up in our houses and didn't know how to spend our time. Work from home became the byword. But the trouble with work from home is that the structure of life of 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of looking after ourselves got muddled. The office hours, there was nothing like office hours. And what's more, in a family where there was one laptop or one computer had to be shared between the working spouses and the children because they also started having virtual schools. So we soon got into a sense of frustration. We moved from fear to fatigue to frustration. Frustration arising out of blurring of our comfort zones. We did not, all of us in our working time had our own comfort zones, our friends, our things that we do, it, people that we met, the way we traveled, all that just vanished. There was more time within the family where we explored good things about each other, but also the monotony of living with the just restricted number of people made matters more troublesome. There were impacts. There were increase in the incidences of domestic violence. And then came, like Mr. Ranganath mentioned, around the month of April, May, June, a number of us lost our close relatives, friends, and family members. That increased our own apprehension of what would happen to us should we get infected. And then people could not have those grief states. Traditionally, if there's a death in the family or friends, people meet together and share the grief. Suddenly, there was loneliness, and people had to just bottle their unhappiness. They could not even grieve over the loss of a close relative. And then there was survivor's guilt. If one member of the, when one spouse passed away, the other spouse felt so, what's popularly called the survivor's guilt. We can't possibly go into that phenomenon of survival guilt in the time that I have. We now are in an era where we are seeing some kind of silver lining to the dark clouds that we have endured between April to approximately September, when the dark clouds started getting a little lighter. But there is this frenzy of activity to fight the possible phenomena of facing the failure. Everything has changed. The method of communication has changed. The method of dealing with each other has changed. People have lost that skill of talking to each other. What made matters worse was this governments all over the world saying maintain social distancing. And the medical world, psychiatrists especially, said maintain social proximity, but virtual social proximity. And we said maintain physical distancing, enhance virtual socializing, and of course, wear your mask and wash your hands as often as possible. All this has led us to worrying about what future holds for us. And this is where mind the main switch is important. All those worries and apprehensions and guilt and what is the future for us, these thoughts have the habit of plunging into the past and make us recall all those unhappy events or unhappy equations on the past, making us either feel upset with our own selves for having taken the wrong decisions. At entire lifespan, starting from birth onwards, we had at least two options on every decision that we took. And we would have taken a decision depending on what we thought was the best decision to take. Unfortunately, distant pastures are always greener. And a lot of us are upset for doing what we did when we had the option of doing something else, which produces a sense of guilt, a sense of inferiority, and a sense of failure. Or when we plunge into the past, we recall all those unhappy events where we are convinced that we were badly treated or unfairly treated by people involved, and produces a sense of anger, a hostility, and the desire to take revenge of sorts. If the anxiety or the apprehensions or the unhappiness does not plunge into the past, it runs into the future and makes us think of all kinds of apprehensions about things that can go wrong. When we start plunging into the future, we always get anxious thoughts of how things can go wrong. We need to rein in our mind and to realize that anxieties, worries, and depression rarely live in the present. They are either go into the past and make us feel sad, angry, hostile, or upset about things that have happened that we cannot change, or make us feel terribly tensed up and worried and inadequate or inefficient at the risk of, at the thought of things that can go wrong. So here lies the situation, the solution to the situation. Live in the present. Please live in the present. Count your blessings of the moment. Don't think too far into future, and think of how you can make the best of what you have rather than getting angry over what you don't have. What we don't have is what we don't have. We hope that we had it, We had the ambitions or desires or goals for having it. But the reality is that we have what we have in front of us, the things that we control for ourselves, and the things that we can share with others for their happiness or progress. So focus on what is in front of us rather than think of what should have been in front of us. While speaking to my colleagues and friends and my patients, I give the metaphor of driving a car. When the driver sits on the wheel on the wheels of his car, the first thing that we have to do is to release the handbrake. Give up the baggage that we all are carrying on us. When we sit on the driver's seat, we have the rear view mirror, we have the side mirrors, and we have the windshield ahead of us. We should certainly be aware of what's behind us. We've got to know what is besides us, but we've got to be focused on what is ahead of us. And that also not too far ahead of us. We just got to look at those bumps and obstacles within 5 to 10 feet of our car and negotiate ourselves for a smooth ride. A good driver can take the bad vehicle to its destination in a happy state, and the bad driving can break down the vehicle no matter how good before reaching the destination. So we've got to be focused on what is right in front of us rather than getting swayed by the fear of the unknown. No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen day after tomorrow, but we know what we can control today. So let's be focused on it. This is a topic where we can keep discussing for the rest of the hour. I'm not going to do that. But when we go into a difficult situation, the traffic officer asked this question. The first is denial. When something unexpected happens to us, something negative that is unexpected and happens to us, our first reaction is denial. No. It can't be. It cannot happen to me. We always feel that troubles and problems and worries are something that should occur to our neighbor and not me. Well, it has happened. So once we realize that, well, it has happened whether we want it or not, the next step is finding faults. Who's responsible for it? Not me. I'm the best. Who's to be blamed for my misfortunes? Then the third stage is to try and negotiate. Do what you need. Go to the hospital and say, doctor, it doesn't matter how much you have to spend. Do it. And then at the end comes the phase of acceptance. So let's look at this cycle, which is described in a different context of psychological phenomena, but it applies to the situation that we are facing just now. The issue is, pandemic has struck. It is a great socialist. It has affected the highest social strata as much as it has affected the lowest social strata. Incidentally, interestingly, people at the lower social strata seem to have better endurance because they are geared to deal with uncertainties and infections. It's the people who always lived in ivory towers have found it a little more difficult to deal with it. We take the example of what's happening in the West. Entire Europe and the US are not able to face the crisis half as well as we in India have been able to face it. Of course, our leaders gave us the right direction. But like when we were told to follow the directions given by the officers of the Prime Minister's office or officers of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and so many restrictions were put on us, it was a fashion to rebel and say, look what people are doing to us. The administration doesn't know what it is doing. In retrospect, we know that whatever the administration did, however bitter the pill, India as a nation is in a much better position than some of the countries in Europe and the US, for example. So that's the lesson to learn. Be innovative. Be aware of the science behind whatever that's happening and learn to cope with the situation. Live in the present. Don't dwell into the past, no fault finding, only solution searching. And when you look at the solution searching, we have something positive. Life can be looked upon as glass half empty and grieve over what is gone and the threat of the rest of it going away. or look upon the life as glass half full and say, okay, I'm going to make every attempt to fill it to the brim. So one of the strategy that is being recommended by some of the global leaders in this mind and the role of mind and the role of emotions in fighting the crisis is to set a target, set a goal, set goals for yourself which are within your reach. Don't opt for the moon. Think of what you can do in the immediate future that will give you a sense of satisfaction, because the biggest happiness is satisfaction of job. So set yourself on a task which you can achieve, which is achievable, and focus all your energies in reaching the target. That's step one. Two, socialize, not physically, but virtually. Talk to people. It's important to talk to people person to person, not machine to machine. So instead of sending messages, phone them up and speak to them. When you talk to people, it takes the burden off your chest and you are sharing your apprehensions or your negative thoughts or your happiness with people who know are going to be able to understand and share your happiness. If you can't find people to share your happiness or your thoughts or your anxieties, try and contact people like Mrs. Malkani, who will set up an audience for you to interact with. And that's the best thing that can happen. I can go on like this, but I think what I'm going to do is to ask my colleagues to realize that humans as a race look for instant gratification. We are now in an era where we have to be patient. We need to be patient with ourselves and radiate patience to others. It was a fashion to be impatient. It had become a fashion to be rebellious. The moment we rebelled, we got social media attention. We don't get attention for being patient. We get social media attention when we are impatient. So being impatient, denied, and object to everything became the token of language for attention speaking. Let's change that. We need to radiate patience and importance of patience and the problems of impatience. Because when we get impatient, we take knee-jerk decisions that we regret in retrospect. And regretting in retrospect, you can't change it. So learn to be patient. Learn to be accommodative of other people's opinions. No point saying my way or the highway. No, everyone has opinion and many other people have many good opinions which are better than us or our individual opinions, even when they come for people who are low down in the hierarchy of social recognition. So, we try to be patient, share your views, share your anxieties, share your happiness, and more so, your source of generating happiness with others, and be accommodative of other people's views. I can go on and on and on. I have some questions that were forwarded to me, and that only reflects the intelligence and the insight of the students who have asked these questions. Some of these questions are too personal, and I would prefer not to get into those questions. I would rather answer some of them as they emerge. I was told to speak for about 20 minutes. I think I've already overshot my time. So let me take the questions. Is that okay, Mrs. Malkani?
Yes, certainly. But if you wish to address a few, whilst you spoke, the issue of social media, because we have a question which just came in a short while ago, that the abundance of information overload, news, and the messaging that goes on, which is creating, because now people don't. Would you like to take that up as part of starting the question session?
Just one piece of very sincere advice is please restrict your COVID TV time and your COVID social media time.
Thank you.
It's important to restrict your time and be very choosy about whose opinion matters. If we don't do that, we get ourselves into a mess which is difficult to answer. Like, surfing Dr. Uncle Google for every medical advice has become so popular that I always tell my patients, most of my patients are internet medical graduates. And that adds to confusion. So decide who you want to trust and listen, or at least share your opinion with that restricted group of people. If you are going to be over accommodative of taking in information from everyone, it's going to be a real muddle. Information is not the same as knowledge. Information is digested and transformed into practical, applicable phenomena. Not all information that abounds the social media can be transferred or converted into a practical, applicable formula. So be sure of what you want. Do you want to be well informed or do you want to be knowledgeable? If you want to be well informed, then computer is the best. I mean, just listen to everything. Computer is the best informed mechanism in the world. It knows everything about everything. That doesn't help. Try to learn what is applicable to you and something that can be transformed into a practical way of happiness generating mechanism. Don't let yourself be overflooded with everything that is negative. I don't have any definite political opinions, but look at what has happened in the US on the evening of the 6th of June and 6th of January and the impact thereafter. By getting swayed simply by someone who's able to speak very emphatically and the listeners not applying their own logic to what was being spoken by one single most powerful citizen in the country, has resulted in an enormous shame for the rest of them. So be choosy about what matters to you, and more than that, who matters to you. And then remember that information is like a sharp kitchen knife. If you use it right, it's a great help in the kitchen. But if you use it wrong, it chops your fingers off. So be choosy about the source, the quantum, and the applicability of the information that is reaching you. If there are two conflicting opinions, there will be soon a third opinion which will again confuse you more. So be sure of who to respect, who to listen to, and most of all, learn to judge your own self and your own self-respect and apply what you are informed in your own cognitive functioning. I hope that answers what Mrs. Malkani raised about social media. It's wonderful only if used properly. If not used properly, it can be a real trouble. I often say that this social media is like a barking dog. If you're walking the street and if a dog starts barking, if you respond to the barking dog, the dog will come and bite you. But if we ignore the dog and stick to your own path, the dog will stop barking. Learn to treat all this like barking dogs. It makes a lot of noise. How much to pay attention to is for your discretion and your wisdom to judge. Sorry, Ms. Mulkani, you're saying?
Yes, I was going to say the same would apply now with the vaccination rollout. What would you say? Because I think that's become the hot topic. How much should it be hot? How much should we believe? The competition of words that are going on with Covishield and Covaxin, even whether to have the vaccine, because that's an immediate thing that is around the corner and it's all pervasive everywhere.
Mrs. Malkani, I'm neither a virologist nor an epidemiologist. But let me just say this, that I did get my vaccination on the 16th of January. I did go ahead and get the first shot of vaccine on the 16th of January because I do feel that science is what I would believe in. And within the scientists, I would believe those scientists who I trust. So I do trust. I don't want to name people without having taken their permission. But I have some very senior clinicians who are, to my mind, like gods of medicine. And now the second generation of the same family of physicians who, to my mind, are gods of medicine. And the son is as big a god as the father. And I take their opinion. In fact, on the 16th of January, when I got a message asking me to go over to a particular center and take the injection of a particular, let me share, I got the Covishield injection because in Mumbai, that is the one that's being given. So when I got this message, the first thing I did was to phone up my colleagues, my senior, very, very senior colleague, my teacher, and the second generation. And both of them said, go ahead. And I went ahead. And I've taken it. And I strongly recommend that everybody takes it. Does it give side effect? Every injection gives side effect. So it did give me a little pain. The next day I did feel a little kind of discomfort in the body. I took one tablet of paracetamol and everything is wonderful. I've been working full day from Monday onwards. So who to listen to is important. We need to listen to people who are not biased. We need to listen to people who are science, who are propagating science and providing science, scientific reasons for saying what they're saying. At one point in time, we said anything that is Indian is best. And now that we have an Indian vaccine, we say, no, we don't want to trust what is an Indian vaccine. So it's kind of, we don't trust ourselves. If we don't trust ourselves, we are never going to be happy. If the science and the national science has, just a minute, sir, I speak to you a little later. I just speak to you. So if the science and if the people who propagate science have given scientific reasons for saying what they are saying, that, saying no reflexly to everything is probably not the best thing to have done. That's my answer to Mrs. Malkani's comment.
Well, thank you so very much. How to deal with
people with a view saying my way or the highway? I would only say look after the signals and the bumps and the speed breakers of the highway. And I think that's what I would do. Or sometimes I would say thank you very much, same to you. Yeah. So what is the emotional breakdown? Is emotional breakdown a symptom of anxiety or any mental illness? No, it's not. All of us get anxious. I learned this from Professor Nesse. Anxiety and depression are not disorders. They are the defense of the body to deal with a difficult situation. When you get anxious or when you feel depressed, it slows down your activity and gives you time to focus on the possible threat ahead of you. It could be a threat of loss of possession, property, prosperity, prestige, or your possessions. Any of the 5 Ps. I repeat, a threat to your prosperity, a threat to your possessions, a threat to your prestige, a threat to your power. Any of these can lead to a sense of anxiety. How am I going to deal with this threat to any of these 5 Ps in my life? So you focus and find a solution. Or a feeling of sadness at having lost any of those 5 Ps to some extent. And how do I cope with it? In life, it's important to feel anxious and important to feel depressed. And when a person feels anxious or depressed, there are 2 options. Either to say, look at me, oh my God, look at me, why me, why only me, oh my God, someone help me. Or why does this only happen to me and why not to people? Everybody is so happy and look, I'm so unhappy. Well, all of us have our fair share of unhappiness and fair share of happiness. In life, the chances of facing situations that make us unhappy are 4 times higher than the situations that make us feel happy. That's human life. We are bound to feel anxious, agitated, unsure of ourselves, and angry more often than we feel happy. There is only one source, the happiness, whereas there are 4 sources that make us unhappy. So we are going to feel unhappy 4 times more often than happy. But the way to deal with unhappiness is never to say, oh my God, look, it's all awful. When we get anxious or we get depressed, it's time to say, okay, this has happened. Let me find a solution. There is never a problem without a solution. Unfortunately, no solutions are instant. I used to jokingly tell my patients that the only instant in life is instant coffee. Everything else takes time. Please be prepared to take time. Even the tea bag has to be dipped in and out. It's not like instant coffee. So, every problem has a solution. You've got to put your mind to it and find a solution. People who are successful find solutions, and people who get into self pity or blaming others never find an answer. So, find a solution. Learn to be happy. Never take anxiety and depression as a blow to your self-esteem or a blow to your lifestyle. It's a reason, it's a stimulus to look at things differently. Always realize there's never a problem without a solution. Some solutions are quick, some solutions take time. But be patient with yourself. Don't go into that blaming others or fault finding. Just tell yourself, I'm gonna do it. I'm going to find an answer. And that's your solution. Next question.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can.
No, okay. Senior citizens. I think it's the same. You have already answered this
Well,
to some extent.
empathy, no sympathy. Never say, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Say, I empathize. I understand what you're going through. What you're going through is not unusual. In today's date and time, feeling anxious, worried, and unsure of the future is the common emotion. Empathize. Say, okay, you're worried about this. What would you like me to do for you to make you feel more comfortable? Rather than imposing our views on the senior citizens, incorporate their views and helping them to find a way of dealing with their own selves. I would always tell the senior citizen that in your age of, I'm by the way 70 myself, but I would tell people that if you have lived the first 6 decades of your life effectively, there are so many good things about you. There might be some shortages or shortcomings in you, but there are so many good things that have helped you to live through this. So think of all the strategies that you employed in the past to go through the crisis, which are much worse than today's crisis. Let's learn to learn lessons and reinforce positive aspects of the personality rather than getting swayed by the unhappy aspects of our of our future, of our current lifestyle. That's the answer, to not get swayed by negativity and cling on to that happiness which is around the corner. That's my advice.
Yes. No, I was going to ask, can you please put up the first WhatsApp question which had come? This is regarding, since we were talking about the senior citizens, there is the other segment where we have people who are physically or faculty impaired. So this question, if you may please take up, Doctor.
Spastic and intellectually disabled child who was also totally dependent was hospitalized for COVID-19 in a solitary hospital room for treatment. Upon release from the hospital, he was in a state of trauma. So what is the recommended line of treatment to overcome the trauma? And since it is an emotion, well, first of all, what the child is going through is not abnormal and it is not a disease pattern. It's completely normal as of today.
Right.
Not just a child who's physically or intellectually kind of at a disadvantage. Every single person recovering from COVID experiences the same sense of trauma and the same sense of what the future holds in equal. This is not an abnormal mental state. This is a complete normal mental state. And the only answer to that is reassuring that, look at the best part. After having gone through the trauma of isolation and having to live by ourselves, you lived through it. Think of the strength, your own physical and mental strength that has helped you to recover from possibly the worst ever crisis in your life. So be optimistic and be jubilant of the fact that you have overpowered a near-death experience. Don't cry over the experiences of the near-death event, but be jubilant that you have won over. The victory over the near-death experience is to be celebrated. Look upon it as your victory and not as self-pity. We could possibly give some medicines, but I don't want to often start recommending medicines and some listeners start prescribing those medicines. Medicines can be given to these some of these badly affected patients. Large majority of them respond to being taught to look at the crisis from a different perspective. That the fact that after going through the COVID, you are able to speak to me is your victory. That you went through your COVID was an unfortunate state, but you've come out of it. Be jubilant and take pride in the fact that you could fight a near-death experience. That is your victory.
Well, thank you. Could we have the next question? I think that a lot of questions have come in with respect to anxiety and how to reduce anxiety, and then stress and anxiety and all of that. So maybe one of these questions will probably answer.
Anxiety, by definition, is fear of the unknown or what the future holds for you. Point is, nobody knows what the future holds for you. So instead of being worried about what can happen to me, think of what is happening to me now. The fact that either you were not affected by COVID into saying that I can instead of getting worried about what the future holds for you, be happy about what you presently are into. What can happen in the future? Nobody knows what can happen in the future. The chances are that good things will happen in the future. We seem to have gone past the worst phase of COVID. We have to redesign our lifestyle. We have a lot to learn of reliving the life in a different method. All this while, a lot of us, so many of my colleagues and friends, feel that they cannot go back to their previous level of activity because the momentum of our life that we had picked up since our adolescence is lost. We've got to restart and regain the momentum of our life, which is very, very possible and rather easy to get there. But never ever say, oh my God. You say, thank God. That's the way to look at it. Thank God that I'm at least in the position where I can even think of what's ahead of me and improve my future prospects, rather than saying, oh my God, look at what's happened to me. My lungs are gone, my whatever. So think of your assets and don't cry over what you think are your shortcomings. That is the important part of life to learn. How to deal with anxiety? Please don't pop a pill. Don't, unless the doctor really recommends. If the anxiety stops you from performing your activities of daily living, ADL, if you are so tied up, so scared, so petrified with apprehensions of what future holds for you, that your life has come to a standstill, physically or emotionally, then medical help would be necessary, and a set of medicines can be prescribed by a physician who's trained to do so. But if we are self-reassured, if we think positive for ourselves, we are going to feel positive about everything else. So think positive and you would feel positive. Otherwise, negativity will overpower you. And the barking dog phenomena, that barking dog will come and bite you. So be self-reassured and lead your life. Every individual has own specifications. Be proud of yourself. Be proud of who you are, what you are, where you are, and what you are capable of achieving. Use your personal assets to your advantage rather than getting scared by the outside information from social media or whatever, and get into a stage of indecisiveness. Fight against indecisiveness. Take well-considered opinion that you generate out of advice from people that you trust and people who you know are known to give stable advice. That's stable advice to people who might be listening.
Thank you, Doctor. The questions that I had sent to you of the students Are there
Yes.
any sub-question that you would like to take up?
Well, there are too many. I just want to, I'll quickly go through some of them. What is the
Yes.
effect of overthinking on mind, and how can one control overthinking? Thinking is a good thing to do. A person who can't think will not be able to progress. It's good to feel anxious and be focused on your lifestyle and help yourself to think positive. The word overthinking is not a scientific term, but a thought process that does not let you maintain a stream of thought doesn't help. So, in practical terms, if your thought process lets you into multitasking, focus, prioritize your goals, and be focused on your goals. Women, more than men, are expert at multitasking. So, if you feel that you're good at multitasking, they're also set up a hierarchy of what you want to do. You should be sure of your targets in a serial order and deal with one target at a time, even when you're planning how to achieve the second target next online. But be focused on one thing at a time. This is broadly my advice. This is not a advice that's applicable to everyone. There are a lot of variations depending upon personal competence, personal past experiences, personal priorities in life, personal reality situations that need to be handled, and so many other things that come up here. If I were to give you an example of, say, a nurse in the ICU of COVID, there would be one nurse between 5 patients, and each of those 5 patients were equally important, but no nurse or doctor could deal with 5, could treat all 5 at a time. They had to prioritize, and most of them did very well. So we have to prioritize tasks beforehand, the thoughts before ourselves, and respond to one at a time in the hierarchy that decide for yourself. Are hallucinations and delusions possible in young age? Why most time old people tend to hallucinate? Well, that's a very interesting question. Every child lives in a fantasy world. Every child presumes the role of a policeman, of a firefighter, or of someone else that the person hero worships. It's often people in the uniform, or a parent, or a grandparent, or someone. Small children start playing doctor, and they go around injecting those toy injections into their friends. They do hallucinate, and they do get it. These are fantasies more than hallucinations and delusions in medical sense of the term. So it's common. And why do most people tend to hallucinate? Well, that's a very loaded question. Why most of the time old people tend to hallucinate? Well, that sentence is not truly true, or true in every sense of the word. But elderly people who have little to look forward to tend to plunge into the past and relive their past, especially happy experiences. Some get into the past unhappy experiences and get very angry and agitated about it, especially when they start hallucinating. But most elderly people, especially the happy elderly, satisfied elderly, do plunge into reminiscing over their past events where they might experience some kind of happy hallucinations coming to you. I often tell my patients, as long as you talk to God, that's fine. If God answers, well, you have a problem. How mind is affected by phobias like pisantophobia, thanatophobia? Well, somebody has really used tongue-twisting terminologies. Pisanthrophobia essentially refers to a fear of a loved one inflicting pain. Fear that people who are close to me will give me pain. This has its own defensive values also. That if there is someone you have fallen in love with, the amount of faith and the trust and the confidence that you put into the partner that you love should be objectively verified, and do not go into a soft, smooth talker's trap. A lot of people go through this. A lot of youngsters fall into the trap of a sweet talker only to realize within weeks of having flung themselves at what they thought was the loved one, to realize that there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So please be sure of the person who you trust, or person in whom you invest your love and emotions, to minimize the risk of getting pain from the loved ones. Remember, difference of opinion is not a trauma. difference of opinion is a step to progress. It's important to have a partner who doesn't agree, provided that you find out a mutually acceptable solution in a mature manner and not like a kid wanting something. Or there is this fear of thanatophobia, or a fear of so many fears that come up in this range. Uh, the entire segment of phobias is a huge topic. All of us have various kinds of phobias and we learn to live with it. Fear of death. What will happen when I die? We honestly don't know. The only certainty of life is that life is uncertain and that death is inevitable. So learn to be honest with yourself. Don't pile on. If you practice what you preach and preach what you practice, you are less likely to be afraid of the unknown in our lives. How is adrenaline hormone related to agoraphobia? Um, Somebody has done some more Google surfing. Adrenaline is essentially a neurotransmitter and a hormone. So there are broadly two sets of hormones, the relaxing hormone and the activating hormone. Adrenaline is an activating hormone. It's a sympathetic system arousal. So when we get anxious, we get a fast pulse rate, the blood pressure rises, respiration becomes a little shallow. These are all signs of autonomic nervous system activity. Anxiety is associated with autonomic nervous system activity. And when a person is into a fright or fear-inducing situation, all this will happen when adrenaline goes up. There is a condition called panic attack, where there is a sudden increase in adrenaline, which produces all symptoms of anxiety, attributable to a surge in the level of adrenaline that's more than what the body requires. Body has its own mechanism of dealing with this excess of adrenaline, and the body's own mechanism to recognize that there is more adrenaline than what is required, and the body's own mechanism to neutralize the excess adrenaline. That phenomena takes about 12 to 18 minutes. So when somebody gets into a sudden feeling of anxiety, fear, or panic, instead of saying, oh my God, if you say, aha, I've got it, it's a waste of 15 minutes, the attack will take care of itself in most cases. Again, this is not a suggestion that is applicable across the board. There are a lot of individual variations, and each person of agoraphobia needs to be seen by a mental health professional and found the cause. If CBT can help, that's best. Otherwise, there are medications for it. What happens to mind while a person is in coma at the time when the person is brain dead? Well, there's a question which I'm not authorized to answer. I don't know. There are studies going on. A whole lot of people, when they become mute, they don't communicate, doesn't mean they don't hear. So some people who have gone into that phase of alertness where they don't communicate, they might still be able to hear. So please be cautious about what is uttered and muttered in presence of a person who seems to be apparently not responding to what is being said. What is the exact brain physiology of a person who's comatose but not brain dead yet? It's a topic by itself. It's terribly, intently academic topic, which is best not tickled at this point. What is the effect of OCD on mind? Now, that's $1 million question. One line answer is that OCD is associated with changes in the brain circuits. There is research to say that every thought has its own brain circuitry. So let me take this question to the next step. There is research to say that people who get anxious at small stimuli have somehow developed a brain circuit which, when stimulated, suddenly activates the anxiety-provoking areas of their brain. There is research to say that when such patients learn to be cool and relaxed, the brain seems to rewire itself. So, if the person has got habitual anxiety or obsessions or phobias or any other psychological unhappy phenomena, presumably has a brain circuit which has to be helped to rewire itself. Many medicines do that. Cognitive behavior therapy does that. There are several other psychotherapeutic techniques where a person can learn to respond to situations differently. And if the habitual pattern of responding to various situations is to remain cool and collected, presumably the brain will rewire itself to a new pattern of thinking and responding to stimuli. Like I said, this is a very deep and an intense topic. I cannot possibly do justice to it to a cross population in the time that we have. It takes hours. Whenever I attend lectures on what happens to brain circuits, it's usually a 3-hour phenomenon of intense science being discussed. What is the role of brain and mind while we dream at night? It depends upon what are the psychological facts related to dream and nightmare. It depends upon what is your training. If you are a psychoanalyst, dreams would reflect some unresolved unconscious conflicts. If you are a pulmonologist, too many dreams might be an indication of obstructive sleep apnea. If you are a psychodynamic psychiatrist, dreams would essentially mean a mind which is not rested because there is a lot going on in the person's mind. So, depending upon the orientation, you would help the person to look upon dreams not as a disease, but as an indicator of some kind of an intrapsychic conflict. There are sleep studies on what is known as actigram studies, which reveal that the last 20 minutes of a normal sleep cycle are dream sleep. Most of us get out of a dream. The last 20 minutes of our usual wake up time is dream sleep. So most of us who have healthy sleep cycle will always get out of a dream on awakening at the scheduled time. We may not remember the dream, but we usually tend to wake up out of a dream. What's more, if you start waking up 10 minutes earlier than your scheduled wake hours, the rest of the day goes tired and fatigued because you've broken your sleep actigraph pattern. So dream has physiological consequences and dream has psychological understanding and interpretations. Nightmares are more common in children. A growing brain is learning new skills in life. A learning brain, right up to the age of 23, 24, is learning how to deal with emerging life situations. Where a person who's preoccupied while going to bed with an unpleasant thought or an unpleasant memory would tend to get a nightmare of the day's residue or the residue of the thoughts which have gone to bed. So the normal advice, our ancestors were geniuses. Our ancestors always told us that you should go to bed with a glass of milk with cream and sugar. That's a very, very important advice because during the day we eat something or the other every 4 hours. But an hour before going to bed, an hour after awakening, we don't eat. So it's 8 hours of sleep and 1 hour each way. So about 10 hours we don't get to eat. And if we do not eat properly before going to bed, we get these hunger cramps or refrigerator raids. And the hunger cramps or the drop in blood sugar also is known in some cases, not in all, but in some cases associated with dreams of eating something or whatever. So the old grandma's advice or the Western pattern of have a supper by late evening, but have something to eat before you go to bed. And if we have our ancestral advice of milk with cream and sugar, we'll see our blood sugar pattern go through without giving us hunger cramps at the end of 10 hours of your normal sleep cycle. Is sleep paralysis a permanent serious disorder or one can normally experience it at some stage of life? Sleep paralysis refers to a person who feels incapable of moving whilst awakening from sleep. This is usually an indicator of high levels of anxiety. Sleep paralysis anyway occurs only in sleep. Since sleep is not permanent, sleep paralysis cannot be permanent by this very same terminology. Paralysis experienced during sleep are on awakening in the hypnagogic state, where a person gets out of sleep but feels that a person cannot move and gets scared and then someone just touches the person and the person is able to move or get back into life. Sleep paralysis refer to that sense of paralysis in sleep, so it cannot be a permanent phenomenon. How can a person overcome from suicidal tendencies by themselves? Also, are there any particular hormone which triggers such thoughts? That's $1 million question. And if I were to have met the person who has asked this question, I would really want to get into a detailed interview of thinking like this. All of us, between the age of 12 to our current age, would at some experience feel life is not worth living. Let me end my life. The fact that we are alive today to go through this discussion is that we did not respond to those thoughts and we are alive. Today, a sense of frustration and a sense of nihilism and a sense of loneliness, a fear of the unknown, a fright of darkness that will never go, further compounded by innumerable economic crises, loss of job, loss of savings, insecurity of continuing jobs. Some families have had to sell off their gold simply to survive. Or what we hear is happening in the US all the time. People are waiting for those checks to come for the government to even pay their rent. A sense of frustration and nihilism has affected the human race world over rather badly. What is the answer to this? There is no one point answer. But my only answer to this is that, like happiness never lasts forever, sadness also doesn't last forever. Every single dark cloud has a silver lining. Darker the cloud, brighter the lining. If we get carried away by the darkness of the cloud, we may fail to see the silver lining. Life is challenging, life is demanding, and the source of happiness or the answer to not getting swayed by the unhappiness in life is to look at your assets and never get swayed by your problems. Oh, look at poor me, generates more nihilistic ideas. But say if someone else can handle it, I can only handle it better. I trust myself. I have no reason to feel that this is worse. Worst is far way ahead, far away, and I hope I never reach there. A thought of suicide is not to be taken lightly. It's a serious, major physical threat of disability. Largest number of people who try to end their life have landed up being physically incapacitated. So when such thoughts come, count your blessings. The fact that you're mentally alert to even think, though a negative thought, think is your strength. What direction the thoughts should go is up to you. Whether you're going to let your brain lead you to a nihilistic thought of death, or whether you're going to use all your mental energies to finding solutions out of the crisis, is step one. Two is to please take help. Share your thoughts, share your agony with the people who you trust, people who you love, and people who are available. At a professional level, there are a series of suicide helplines. Please phone up one of the suicide helplines. There are volunteers and there are paid professionals who are trained to help a person who's thinking of ending life acquire skills of living life happily, not just live life, not dragging life, but to generate happiness from inner sources. Think of your strengths and don't get swayed by what might be considered at that point in time a moment of irreversible pain or grief. Please learn to be patient. Learn to be patient with yourself. Trust yourself, if nobody else, your own self. And then you'll always find a solution. In the dark moment when everything appears black, just switch off and switch on. Stop thinking and restart thinking, and your thinking process will be on a different plane. If you can't do this by yourself, consult your loved ones, consult the opinion leaders in your contact, or contact the countless suicide helplines that are on the net. We come to this: if a person suffers migraine because of depression, not because of heredity, will it pass on? Will it go to the next generation? Well, most migraines are tension headaches. When a person gets into too much of thinking negative, gets tensed up about things, it produces what is broadly called tension migraine or tension headaches. Would genes transmit a disease? Well, there are no genes, or there are very few genes which transmit a disease or a disorder in an autosomal dominant pattern. That's 100% of people having a component of that gene will have the same disease. That happens very rarely in very few conditions. Most genes transmit vulnerability. They don't transmit the disease, but a vulnerability to the disease. So there is a genotype and a phenotype. If you have the genetic propensity for developing a particular disorder, mental or physical, the lifestyle would determine whether that genetic predisposition translates into a physical disease in majority of the cases. Mrs. Malgani, I think with this I have answered the 10 questions you had sent me.
Yes, you have. I think we are quite inundated with plenty of questions, and we are definitely beyond our 1 hour. We can continue for a few minutes if you have time.
I have another call coming up in 10 minutes from now. So, and then I would just like to so maybe 5 more minutes. There's a question. Will you please tell us more about obstructive sleep apnea a little bit more? Well, I'm not a pulmonologist. I am a psychiatrist. Obstructive sleep apnea refers to an obstruction of your breathing passage in sleep. So apnea is absence of breathing, obstruction in sleep. The sleep medicine is a developing branch of medicine. Let me share one case where I first time in my life got sensitized to this obstructive sleep apnea. Was in the year 2008 probably, or 9, when I was attending a conference of the American Psychiatric Association. I think it was in Philadelphia, where my son and I were sharing the room, and my son's class junior, who was actually 10 years older to him by age, had no place to stay. So he came to share our room, and he brought with him a tote bag containing what looked like a suction machine. And I had never seen a thing like that before. And I asked him what it was all about. And he said, "Sir, this is a machine which has changed my life." It was what is known as a CPAP, a continuous positive air pressure pump. So he said he was suffering from an obstructive sleep apnea, which presents in many ways. And he was diagnosed variously as suffering from physical diseases, depression, anxiety, till somebody made a diagnosis of sleep apnea, put him on a CPAP machine that he says changed his life. His daughter, who used to stay away from him because of his bad temper, started becoming dear to him. I saw him when I first met him. It was 6 months since he had started using CPAP, and he had lagged behind his professional career by 5 years. That's how, in spite of being older to my son and being an American, he was junior to my son in his hierarchy of the department. And 2 years later, he qualified. He was appointed a psychiatrist when he became the chief psychiatrist of a chain of hospitals. And he's happy as ever. He still writes to me and shares his happiness with me. Obstructive sleep apnea is a treatable condition where a person has difficulty in breathing, which is noticed at the time of going to sleep, and that it can be taken care of. Obstructive sleep apnea can also occur in children who have got tonsils that blocks their respiratory passage. Obstructive sleep apnea is not restricted to people with small neck and a big body build. It can also occur in people who are underweight. It's a treatable condition. There are sleep studies which positively establish the diagnosis, and a CPAP, continuous positive air pressure pump, is a miraculous treatment for sleep apnea. Some people then eventually need some surgeries, but that's later on. That's all from me for the moment.
Thank you, Doctor. I think your subject, and it's really, I was listening to you, and it is so practical. And I think you, the questions which have come, and there are a few more, but I will not take that up now. It's on a similar level, you know, most questions talking about depression, anxiety, stress. And I think you have put all of them together. So going forward, I think my work is cut out. I have to make sure that maximum people log in, post your session, and hear you instead of my writing a report in detail. Because I could never do it. Would be way better, and I think that's what we are going to do. So your
one line take home message is
Yes.
that in life it's good to feel anxious and good to feel depressed. A life without anxiety and depression would be so monotonous that it will be a boredom. Thank your stars that you are in a position to experience anxiety and depression. And when you feel anxious or depressed, instead of saying, oh my God, poor me, or self-pity, say, okay, this is a stepping stone to my next success. Think, respect yourself, have patience, and take anxiety, every instance of anxiety and depression, as a stepping stone to further success, not as an indicator of failure in your personal life. Thank you very much. It's wonderful speaking to you.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I mean, it was really, I would say, a very illuminating presentation. And I think a lot of people would have found it extremely useful in their daily this thing. And we do look forward to this recording of this today's program being seen by many people hereafter and help them to cope up with various problems, particularly in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So thanks a lot.
Grateful.
Okay,
Thank you.
Doctor, in normal time, it would be our privilege to hand over our memento to you in appreciation. But for now, as you rightly said, everything has to be virtual. So let me, on behalf of my fellow trustees, present to you our virtual memento. The actual memento will reach you. So
I'm grateful. Thank you.
this has been a session like none other. And I think we will have a long relationship of sorts for your guidance to few of the things that we discussed prior to your session, and definitely some takeaways from this evening's session, because this is not something we can stop with.
Thank
So
you. I
thank
look
you
forward.
once again. Thank you. So to our viewers, thank you, and particularly to you, Dr. Vahia, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Goodbye.